All right, we might kick off as people start rolling in to attend our lunchtime webinar as part of our Housing First series on sustaining tenancies. Welcome and thanks for coming. Before we get going, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri land in the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge that these lands were never ceded, not ever, and were taken under the falsehood of Terra Nullius. Thanks for coming today. This is a really exciting webinar because we're talking about social inclusion and connection to community, which is a really huge part of Housing First, and a really important element to ensuring that people, all of us, feel safe where we live, and really create a sense of home and belonging, and particularly for the people that we're supporting through Housing First programs. It can be a really challenging aspect of settling in and remaining in a tenancy. We're really lucky today to have a panel of experts to tell us about their experiences of community connection. We've got Lucy Hyslop and Nat MacKintosh, who are Journey to Social Inclusion case managers. And we've also got Liz Flegel, who's a peer support worker with Nat and Lucy, and who has a lived experience of being that at home. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. I'm not going to keep talking for very long. We're really keen to hear any questions you might have, and so I encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions as we go along, and at the end we can look at those questions and go through them and ask away. But without any further ado, I will hand over to our panel, and we'll kick off. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sean. Yep, so we are Liz, Lucy and Natalie from the Journey to Social Inclusion program, or more commonly referred to as J2SI. We are a 3-year housing program for people who've experienced chronic rough sleeping, and where brief intervention style programs have been unsuccessful. So Lucy and I, we're intensive case managers, and Liz is our wonderful peer support worker. We hope to share with you some of the learnings that we've gained as case managers over the past year that have helped us to develop our practice in connecting to community. So after the slideshow, Liz will share some insights from her lived experience and from her role as a peer support worker as well. So I'm just going to get up our slideshow, if you could bear with me for one moment. Okay, so Lucy, over to you.
Thanks, Natalie. So when a person moves to a new area, a new home, or a new neighborhood, we found they can often feel a really deep sense of not belonging or discomfort being in a new place. People we work with have told us they feel displaced or they feel lonely and isolated. They've got a lot of feelings of fear, undeserving of the property. There's a lot of stress and anxiety as well. So bringing people out of their comfort zone can be really confronting, and there's a lot of responsibility tied to tenancies that can cause anxiety. Things like paying rent, paying bills, remembering what day the bins go out, finding a new GP, or even something like working out how to get the train into the city to see friends. These are all things that we might take for granted because tenancy is something that a lot of us have experienced for our whole lives. It comes naturally, but can cause a lot of stress for our clients when they move. These stresses and feelings of loneliness can lead sometimes to coping mechanisms such as increased drug use or increased feelings of wanting to self-harm. We find sometimes people even return to rough sleeping. People fear discrimination from their neighbours, or they might feel like they look different or like they look like they don't belong. And unfortunately, sometimes people do experience really horrible discrimination from neighbours, where neighbours have been rude or unkind to our clients.
Yeah, completely. So connection to a space, place or group of people We think that it helps a person feel like they belong and helps them foster a sense of ownership, independence, and confidence over their new home. So we see part of our role to be supportive in ensuring that person can access the community and participate in the things that interest them, so that they can develop a sense of identity in their new space. Supporting our clients to connect to community, put down roots, and feel like they belong acts as a protective factor, we think, and increases the likelihood of a successful tenancy in our experience. So community connections can be a mixture of essential needs, so like health services, chemists, food services, and also fun and recreational activities as well. So we've provided you with a few examples of what that might look like. So one that I'm going to speak to today is the chemist. Connecting to a community can be as simple as supporting someone to link in with their new chemist when they move house. If someone's picking up medication regularly from their chemist, this is often the first formal support established in their new area. We think that a chemist can act as an anchor point if your client is without a phone and you need to reach them. And it can also be a safe place in the community where people know their name and where they have a sense of ownership and belonging. So there's also local cafes as well. That's another really easy way to connect people to their local community. So supporting someone to connect to their local cafe can be a great way to model the accessibility of community connection. This can be easily integrated into your regular catch-ups as well, obviously post-COVID. So for some, it can actually be a really daunting task approaching a new cafe for the first time. So you might want to offer walking with someone to a new cafe for the first few 2 or 3 times when they move to their new home. And then another really great one as well is Lentil is Anything. If you haven't heard of that, that's a cafe, a not-for-profit cafe where people can go and access meals for free if they don't have funds to pay the $15 charge. So someone with low funds can still enjoy the experience of eating out in a fun setting with really friendly staff. The great part about that as well is there's also a volunteer opportunity for people who are interested. So it's just a really easy sort of access to volunteer opportunities and potentially even employment later on down the track.
Yeah, I've found in my practice with people that op shops can be a really great space for people to feel connected to community as well. So I think op shop staff, I think we all know this, they're usually really friendly, they're super welcoming, they're always up for a chat. It's a place where people can go and, you know, sometimes people might walk into another kind of shop and staff are looking at them a little bit funny or a little bit suspicious, but an op shop is somewhere where everyone is welcome. And like Nat was saying with Lentil is Anything, op shops also offer volunteering programs as well. So it can be a really great way for people to connect with community. It's also really fun to go with your client to an op shop if they've just moved into a new property. You can go and maybe help them find some things for their new home. You can also advocate maybe for a voucher from the op shop, so they've got a little bit of extra spending money. So I think that's a really good place to maybe get some community connection started when someone moves. Another point that we really wanted to highlight is that connecting to community isn't necessarily about connecting to other people or doing a specific activity like an art class or a NA meeting or something like that. It can be really simple to start out. So it could be something like just accessing a communal space like a park or a walking trail by the river, or even just going to the beach and feeling safe in that space. So we can really support the people we work with to find these spaces in their neighbourhood, spaces where they can really relax and enjoy themselves and feel a bit like they're part of the community without necessarily having to go and introduce themselves as a new person.
Yeah, exactly. So of course, connecting to people to community is not without challenges and barriers. So we've kind of highlighted 4 that we think were the ones that we came across the most when connecting people to community. The first one is discrimination. So the people we work with, they can sometimes be unfairly excluded or banned from community, and that can include places like Centrelink, health clinics. The chemists is often a place where people can be banned. And we can support here by advocating for their rights and inclusion in the community. So that's a really key part of our role, is helping to break down those barriers around discrimination and service bans. The next one is just, it's kind of intuitive. It's a lack of confidence. So we really hope to build and foster independence in people in the beginning of the program, because reaching out to the community outside of their comfort zone can often be a really daunting task. So some of the things we do, sort of similar to what I was saying with Lentil as Anything, is we might take someone to a cafe, or take them to the local park the first 2 or 3 times, just to kind of familiarize themselves with the area, with somebody that they trust as well. And that modeling process is really important, just showing someone that it is accessible, and that it is something within their reach as well.
I think when we were discussing this earlier with Liz, she almost likened case managers to a bit of a tour guide sometimes to a new suburb or a new area, and kind of showing people this is where you can access this, and this is where you can go and get this. And sometimes it's just so helpful to literally walk with someone there and take those first steps literally with them, can be so supportive.
Yeah.
Another challenge that the people we work with can face is expenses. So we all know that programs and activities can be really, really expensive, and this can make them completely inaccessible for the people that we work with. A lot of the people we work with don't have much money left over once they've paid for those, basic living expenses like food and rent. So I think this is somewhere where we can really use our skills as a case manager to research cheap or free activities. We can advocate for discounts. We can try and apply for funding for, say, art equipment or music classes or whatever it is the person's interested in. At J2SI, we've actually had a lot of luck with getting free bikes for the people we work with. So we've been in touch with a bike co-op, Back to Bikes. We've just told them a little bit about who we are and the people we're working with, and they've actually offered free bikes to anyone in our program who'd like one. So that's where the case manager stuff really comes in. Like we can really use those skills to get more affordable options for our clients. Another challenge, I think, is worker bias. So I think this can be where we really need to challenge our ideas of what community connection are. So something that we might think is really important is actually not that important for the person that we're working with. We need to remember that the person is the expert in their own life. They know what's going to work best for them, and we really need to be prepared to challenge our own understandings and beliefs here.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak to the 2 challenges that I mentioned in a case study that I've prepared for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a person that I've been working with for the past year. We're going to call them Joe for the purpose of protecting their identity. So Joe's a 43-year-old man currently living in stable housing through our J2SI head lease program. However, prior to this, Joe experienced chronic rough sleeping for the better part of the last 3 decades. So this has been part of Joe's life for most of his life. Joe describes his homelessness as a pattern of rough sleeping, often involving periods of incarceration and multiple trips to the emergency department. Joe described feeling frustrated at not having anyone show him how to make friends when he was younger with people who don't use drugs. Which was a pretty profound statement for me to hear. Joe shared that this was the way he felt most comfortable relating to people and was not sure how to introduce himself to people outside of this world. Joe is an intelligent, creative man who enjoys op shopping for funky jackets in the local op shops. He loves to create songs on his guitar and thinking deeply about the world around him. We've had lots of really wonderful philosophical chats. When I met Joe in 2020, he reported feeling deeply lonely, frustrated and anxious and suspicious of everyone. Joe was also banned from multiple basic needs services like Centrelink, transitional accommodation centres, pharmacies, and even some food services as well. So Joe had no contact with family, and he often spoke about a deep desire to have friends who he can play guitar with. So moving forward, Joe moved into his head lease in December of last year, so he's been there just over a year now. And despite the initial challenges, Joe has managed to build a really supportive network of informal and formal supports. In the early stages, I provided advocacy to have bans removed from essential services that included Centrelink and also his previous chemist as well. Facilitating the removal of these service bans demonstrated to Joe that relationships can be repaired, and this was something that he noted to me was really important in lowering the barriers to accessing more community spaces, because he felt like he had ruptured so many relationships in his community. He wasn't sure how to navigate the process of repairing them. These services, they also added to the growing list of spaces and places where Joe felt recognised and safe, which again is just really important, just places around him where he could go, where people knew his name and where he felt comfortable being himself. So after a time settling into the routine, things were going quite well with the formal supports. Joe wanted to expand his connection to the area beyond these formal supports. So to do this, Joe actually reconnected with workers from a local health clinic. He had an existing rapport with the staff going back, I think, 10 years or so. He hadn't had much contact with them in the last couple of years. And they were really happy for him to pop in weekly to have informal catch-up. So it wasn't a formal service arrangement. It was just simply another place for Joe to go to feel accepted and to say hi to people who knew him. And if he was having a bad day, he said he would often take himself there and just say hello, and it would make him feel better. The next thing we did was we linked Joe into a local peer networking group. So this was a big step up from just services. This was now integrating into community outside of these supports and connecting with people who had similar lived experiences to Joe, which he said he found really, really helpful. He's been there for pre-COVID lockdown. He was there for about 6 months, attending every week. He's made some really great friends, and he now plays guitar there as well in the evenings. So yeah, a really, really big step for Joe. So some other things that I did in the beginning was I familiarised myself with the local chemist, where Joe picked up his daily methadone and some of his other medication. And this became a really large link in the chain of communication when Joe had misplaced his phone. So it was a really great way for me to be able to find out where Joe was or leave a message if I was struggling to get through to him. And it just kept up that momentum, that rapport as well, which is really important. So after some time, it was apparent to me that Joe's confidence connecting with others was growing. So I began to try and expand Joe even further beyond some of those formal supports and the peer group. This is where I introduced him to Lentil as Anything, which I talked about before. And we used our weekly catch up to explore some other places of interest as well. So cafes, a local bike shed, and I think there was also a food group that he joined as well, where he learned some cooking skills. So this was, like, again, a really easy way for me to model the accessibility of community supports and to ease any concerns about that daunting process of how to connect to those places. So it didn't take long for Joe to establish a pretty good routine with his local coffee shop, and he is now known there on a first name basis. He's greeted by lovely, friendly staff when he goes to pick up his coffee. And since connecting with his local bike repair shed, Joe has purchased a new bike for himself as well. And this is now another way that he gets around town, where before he was just using public transport. And that's Joe. And yeah, if you have any questions about that, please pop them in the Q&A tab, and I'd be happy to answer any of those at the end of the session. Lucy, so I think we're going to talk to Liz now.
I'm going to do my case
study. Oh, you're going to do your case study. I think I spoke enough for both of us.
Thanks, Natalie. So now I've just got a little case study as well for someone that I have been working with. Again, I'm not using his real name, same as Natalie, just for a bit of privacy there. So I'll be talking about Peter. And Peter is a single man in his 50s who has an extensive experience of homelessness. Peter is currently living in a private rental head lease property in Melbourne's inner north, but prior to this, he was rough sleeping in a park for 7 years. Whilst living in the park, Peter had no Centrelink income, and he carried all of his possessions with him in a shopping trolley. Sleeping rough meant that Peter was constantly on the move and he often didn't feel safe where he was living. He's described to me being woken up multiple times in the night and having to quickly pack up and move to a new location. He's currently suffering from post-traumatic stress as a result of being attacked and threatened many times when rough sleeping. Peter's got no connection to any family or friends, and when he moved to his private rental property, he didn't tell anyone where he was moving, and he didn't want anyone to follow him and potentially stand over his property, which is something that he has experienced in the past. Before his experience of homelessness, Peter worked as a mechanic. He has a love of cars and an interest in fixing and making things from found objects. He's made some incredible furniture for his new house. And he also really enjoys spending time with animals and in nature, and he loves exercising. So when Peter first moved into his new property, I tried to link him in with a local community exercise group for older people, as I thought this might align with some of his interests. But he actually told me he wasn't interested in this at all. And a few weeks after settling into his new property, Peter told me that I'm the only person that he speaks to. I asked Peter how this made him feel, and he said it actually made him feel great, and he felt really safe that no one knew where he was living, and he didn't have to think about interacting with other people. This was something that was actually really tricky for me to kind of get my head around and understand at first when I spoke to Peter about it. I'm a very social person, and for me, happiness comes from connecting with others. And it actually made me feel really sad to think that Peter didn't have anyone to speak to apart from me. What I really had to remember though, and what Peter really taught me, is that throughout Peter's life, other people have been a source of stress, fear, and at times danger. And so for now, he doesn't have to worry about anybody else. He's by himself and he's enjoying a bit of peace and quiet. So instead of trying to find that connection to community within people and within social groups and activities, Peter and I have really worked on helping him feel connected to the space and the landscape around him. And we've also been linking him in with services that support his essential needs. So together we've looked at a map and we located a nearby park where they've got some free exercise equipment that he can use, and he's been going there every evening to do his exercises. And we also found a really beautiful walking path along a nearby river. And he goes there several times a week and he tells me all about the birds that he's seen and the dogs that he's meeting, and it's a really enjoyable time for him. He's also linked in with a local GP who he trusts and a local counsellor at a community health centre who is supporting him to understand his post-traumatic stress a little better. He goes to the library as well, where he gets some assistance with using the internet on his iPad. And so I think the thing about these relationships is that these are people where he can have a really structured and predictable relationship with. He knows because of their professionalism that they're not going to overstep any boundaries of a relationship. And so it's somewhere where he can feel very safe. He says that one day he would really like to volunteer for an organisation called Orange Sky, who helped him a lot when he was rough sleeping, but he's really not ready for that yet. So that's something that's on the back burner for now. At the moment, he's really enjoying spending time alone, and he says his new neighbourhood feels very peaceful and safe. So my work with Peter has just constantly reminded me that I need to check my biases and I need to check my assumptions about what people need and what connection to community is. I've got to remember that when we work with people, they are the expert in their own life. They know what's best for them and they know what's going to work for them. And talking about experts in their own life, we're now going to have a Q&A with Liz, our wonderful peer support worker.
Oh, there I am. Shall we stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, we'll stop sharing the screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz. I'm the peer support worker at J2SI. And one of the beautiful parts about my role is that I'm hired because of my lived experience. And I just want to put out there that part of my lived experience has been generated over my whole lifetime. I've experienced reoccurring homelessness since I was a child. And I have now been in secure housing for 7.5 years. So I just wanted everyone to know that that's where these experience and insights are coming from, to give a little bit of a background. Now Nat and Lucy have prepared some questions for me just to help keep this on track, because I love to chat. That's one of the things that I'm known for in the office. So just bear with me because of the microphone scenario. Nat's going to be able to hear her. If there's any trouble with that, I'll be able to interpret the questions within my answers. Okay, so here we go, Nat.
Thank you, Liz.
That's all right.
Thank you again for joining us today. So first question, what does community connection mean to you?
Okay, so community connection brings forward the idea that it is finding an avenue to connect to like-minded individuals, a place of safety where you feel like you belong, who you are and who you present as, without having to wear a mask of who you think society is expecting you to be able to engage with a greater, wider set of people. And therefore it gives you that sense of grounding where you're able to earth yourself and start to transition from this survivor into someone who can actually thrive and start to experience life at what they're worthy of, and that is to be happy and secure.
Beautiful, thank you.
Do you want to just read?
Yeah. Cool. All right, so the next question, I hope you guys can hear me, is what steps did you take to connect to community when you moved into your secure housing?
Okay, so this is a really interesting path. So something that we spoke about while we were preparing for this webinar was actually part of my story is that my housing supports and my housing workers weren't who connected me to community. It actually was 5 years after I'd been in my secure housing, after a very traumatic experience that had been a build-up of many years, that AOD services were who connected me to community. So part of answering this, I just want to highlight that these are, you know, new things that are coming into housing, and this wasn't always used. And so it's really valuable that we all understand how important this is, because there were 5 years of my secure housing where I wasn't secure and I was at high risk. But the steps that were taken were to find a way to get me to reconnect with myself first. And what really started to work was getting to know me, getting to know Liz, and for me to become a person again and not just a housing client. So with questions that were being asked about what my interests were, what I liked doing, what were the things that made me feel happy in life, what did a day look like for me where I experienced less anxiety and felt safe and able to exit my home. Because when we see a disconnection in community, things like agoraphobia come up and a recluse lifestyle. And so they were barriers that I had to overcome. But it was definitely also peer support that helped me. So it was engaging in programs such as NA was one of the very great first steps I actually took. And then joining in community activities like such as art therapy, and also my child entering into primary school gave me the push that I needed, especially at the time we didn't have a vehicle and we were walking really long distances. And in those walks, it got me out of the house and started getting me speaking to neighbours about their gardens and starting to talk to the other parents at school pickup and drop off. So those were the first very little tiny steps that I took.
Great, thank you.
That's all right.
So was there anything that workers did or didn't do?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I touched on that a bit just previously, that my housing workers, a connection to community was, you know, was really looked over. Like I've got to admit, for me, being a young single mother, you know, if it wasn't for my maternal child health nurse in those previous 5 years when I was disconnected, bringing me into enhanced child play groups, I really would have got nothing out of, you know, and I wouldn't be sitting here today. I'll be quite blunt about that. You know, those steps are really what have brought me here to even, you know, be able to speak to everyone. So some of those things, though, these barriers that I had to overcome was because I presented like I had myself together. it was deemed that I was able to be let go of certain support services, and it seemed like the housing, once that was granted, nothing else mattered, because as far as everything was concerned, I ticked all the boxes. I was in a safe, secure location. I'd been linked in with a maternal child health nurse, and the rest was, you know, as it would pan out. And another thing was believing, because I had an emergency contact that is my sister, that I had a connection to family. However, we weren't connected until recently because of my lifestyle and the things that I've been through. So really leaving those bias at the door, and like understanding that just because there is someone that you can ring in case of a medical emergency doesn't mean that there are people that are actively coming in and helping. I know that one of the great things that I did find over the years with engaging with services was the people that were able to leave those bias and, you know, let me know that it was okay to be who I am, and let me know that it was okay to not have family connection. Like, just because that's what we all think, you know, that can be implemented in people's minds, that having a strong family connection is, you know, until you have that, you actually aren't living a fulfilling connection to community. And I had one worker in particular who, you know, really helped me release those fears. And they started building on a form of a friendship. And because of the respect they gave me and the space to be who I was and validate that for me, I actually started to learn what it felt like to be treated with respect. And when I started to learn that, I was able to start losing this inability to foster true connection. And I started stepping away from the people that I had been connecting with that were in circles of very destructive behavior. And I was able to go, no, I've seen what it feels like, and I want more of that. I want to be welcome. I want to talk with people. I want to feel safe. And so having that was really great. Whereas I've come across some services where I was given unsolicited advice that was so traumatic, it saw me go further into myself and lose all self-respect. And that unsolicited advice came from someone that really, you know, in my opinion, shouldn't be working in these kind of services. However, I believe it could have been avoided if they'd actually read my file correctly, and instead of just assuming, that they asked me questions. I was given advice that was pertaining to being a young woman, and that was all. And there was no history given to know that that advice wasn't going to work for me. So that was a big one. And some of the things was like, one thing that I love that I now use in my role as a peer support worker is just try something once. That was something that was really good for me to learn, was that it's okay if you don't like something, you don't have to do it again. And I think when I say that to the clients that I work with now, they're more keen to give something a go. And it was also when I had the support of knowing that there was someone there with me, and that helped me build the confidence to then start trying things on my own.
Amazing. Yeah, I think you raised some really important things there that as workers, it's really important that we hear.
Yes.
Because quite often we don't often get to hear from the perspective of someone with lived experience about what is and isn't working. So I'm going to jump into the next question, which is more about your role supporting people as a peer support worker.
Yeah.
So how do you use your role as peer support worker to help others connect to community?
Okay, so one of the first things I do when I first meet someone that I'm going to work with is I break down the barrier of separation and segregation. And I do that in a whole heap of different ways. And some of these ways I can't teach, they are learned, and you can only really truly gauge them from learned experience. And to be honest, but I can point them out. It's how you dress, it's how you hold yourself, those things start to break down the barriers of feeling less of a distance. And I let them know about shared experience. And often with our rough sleepers, especially in the St Kilda area, once they know that part of my childhood was spent staying at a boarding house known as the Gatwick, straight away I become a person at their table instead of the server. And when you can do that, you can really connect amazingly. And so when they can see themselves in me just as much as I see myself in them, we can move forward. And I'm really just there to let them know that there is light at the end of that tunnel, because when you're living this life, you have tunnel vision, and it is just the only thing that can get you up each day is the hope that you will actually reach that light. And so I like to come in with a torch and go, you know what, it might seem really far away, but I got you right now, and you just let me know where it is that you feel most scared and let me be there, because I've got some bravery behind me, and nothing makes me more braver than being able to walk beside someone when I've been in their shoes.
Yeah, amazing. And I've definitely seen that in action, and it's been really incredible. Liz has been instrumental in connecting a number of not just mine, but other people in the J2SI program to their community, and you're really ingenuitive when it comes to thinking about how to connect someone based on who that person is. And I think listening is something that I've learned from you, as I've learned a lot of skills around that. So yeah, we thank you for that. Just quickly, I know we're kind of running out of time, but just the last question. So Lucy and I just wanted to acknowledge, we both described case studies that feature men. So as a woman with lived experience, do you think there are different barriers to women accessing community than there are for men?
Oh yeah, definitely. As we all know, women are less likely to present to services because of shame and guilt, especially if we have children. And there's so much fear that if we can't provide housing, that our baby's going to be taken away from us. And I'll tell you what, it is proud, that is the truth to it, you know. And then there's not feeling like you can connect with the other parents at the childcare services or the school services, because you know you're embedded in this shame and guilt that you think anyone that has a smile on their face must have it together more so than you. And you know, it's a really hard one. And I do feel that men have a great coming together in these scenarios, like men's shared and men's services. And sometimes the segregation of a women's service is great for safety. But I think one of the other things is never be afraid to ask a woman if she would like to be linked in with some male workers, because things like domestic violence or family violence, or even just violence in general, and you know, sexual assaults, they happen. But it doesn't mean that we're all afraid to reconnect with men, and it doesn't always mean that the male was the perpetrator. And I've found the more that I've been able to engage in some male-led, like male services, that like providers, it's helped me rebuild my trust and my confidence, and it's helped me define relationships a lot differently. And they're important. It's important that we break down these segregations and we start coming together as a community, even from the beginning of when you're working with your support services.
Amazing. Yeah, wow, that hearing that really hits home to me, because I think we can be quite afraid to or quite protective rather, and maybe sometimes to the disadvantage of not giving people experiences to have healthy and productive relationships with people who might have been a perpetrator or who've come from that demographic. Great. That's the end of our webinar. So if you have any questions, I think that Sian's going to help facilitate some of those being put forward. I'm sure most of them are for Liz, so we'll probably just
do I need to open that, or
oh no, it's all right, you just relax. Thank you so much, that was really, really awesome. I feel inspired. It's been it's great to have both perspectives of you know, people who are workers, supporting clients and being really creative and thinking about different ways that you can really build a sense of hope. That was something I really took from what you were saying, is to rebuild that sense of hope for people. And Liz, obviously, we really value the voice of people with a lived experience. It's just a really good example of how valuable it is for the people that we're working with to actually have someone who has that first-hand experience and the nuances about interactions with services and activities and ways that people can interact with you that workers might not actually see. So actually hearing from you, you know, your insights around the experience of women approaching services, which when you say it's really obvious, but you know, it might not be something that we automatically think of. So it's just really good to be challenged. I think that one of the things that I was keen to know about was, Liz, you mentioned that kind of sense of rebuilding your sense of who you were. It took a bit of time. What were some of the things that helped you to do that?
A spiritual connection.
Yeah.
I found that not knowing who I was a spiritual dis-ease. Like I was uneasy in my own skin, and that's anxiety in a nutshell. So finding, I'm really fortunate that I had workers that were really open to that at one stage, and they linked me in with more holistic and alternatives, such as like yoga and breathwork practices and art therapy. And these were all things that I was really interested about, but you know what? I couldn't afford them. They're just not accessible, and they are so important. So that was a huge one. That was a huge one. And it was based on me, and it felt amazing doing something for myself. And when I could fill that cup, it poured out into my house. And that's how I really was able to turn it into a home.
Yeah, that's something that's really struck me throughout this whole presentation, that this side of the support and the focus is often not the thing that's front of mind when workers are kind of picking up a case and going, right, I've got tick boxes and I've got to do this assessment, I've got to make sure somebody's referred here or there. This stuff is actually the stuff that really helps people to feel settled and safe. And so it's really great that we're able to have this conversation and hear from you how much that's impacted your ability to kind of feel creative in your own space. So I find this really exciting that we're having this discussion. And we do have, I think it was Ronnie asked a question, which is, so Ronnie said, I agree, community integration is so important. Have you continued to support this when there have been limits from COVID-19, which is obviously very relevant at the moment, and we know that it's had impact on this, and with the lockdowns and restrictions? So I guess that might be a question, yeah, for all of you to think, other ways that you how have you kind of navigated COVID-19 and supporting people?
So we are still able to do certain outreach depending on the scenario, and we obviously take COVID really seriously. That's where a lot of phone calls have been happening, and getting clients access to phones. And I'll tell you what, the pay phones now being free so they can call us, because phones are often lost. Like, phones are one of the hardest things to keep track of, has been a great thing. I know that. And for me as a peer support worker, I know this week I'm actually going on an outdoor walk, because you're allowed to have walking buddy, and I'm helping someone get familiar with their new area because they've moved. It's been a drastic move, and they've told me that one of their fears is encountering volatile and aggressive people, because that's something that's happened in the past for them. And you know, they looked me up and down when I met them, and they're like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen with you. And I go, not on my watch. I go, so we're going to go walk, and we're going to get a map, and we're going to figure out where the local food services are and any other care providers. And we're going to take in some scenery and some local art, some street art. And that's, you know, helping someone just feel safe on their own, because often the first step isn't so much the connection with the other people, it's connecting yourself to the earth that you're living on and being able to freely move through it with a sense of security inside you. So that's where I start the process.
Yeah.
I think just jumping in a little bit from a case manager perspective, I completely agree with what Liz is saying. I think like connecting to space is a really good place to start. If other services, it's a good time for us to maybe, as case managers, do a bit of our research into what is going to be available in the community when things open back up. Because I think sometimes, you know, it's like what you were saying, Shan, you get a little bit busy as a case manager with ticking boxes and doing referrals. And I think now if we have a little bit of extra time, we can put some energy into talking with the person and finding out what they actually do want to do when they have the opportunity to, and then spending some time looking into what the options will be when COVID is over. Hopefully,
Yeah.
or when restrictions ease a little bit, because it's not going to go on forever. The lockdown won't be here forever.
Yeah, I think what I can see is a theme around making time for this and listening and hearing and thinking about the person in front of you as a completely independent person, individual, thinking about what they need. And I can see there's a lot of support from attendees and obviously from us about having peer support workers in the sector. And I guess we've got a question here. For organisations that are considering employing peer support workers, what are your top tips?
Okay.
This is a good one for you, Liz.
Look, I'm going to be honest. I stumbled across the job, like I really did. But what has been helped in terms of being supported as peer support worker? Yeah, right. Okay, there's heaps there. I'll tell you what. I don't have an answer to that exactly, but I'm going to share with you some of the barriers that I'm overcoming. That is, I'm less nervous working with the people outside than I am with my fellow colleagues in the office. And I'm trying to turn that into seeing myself a bit as a bridge, but breaking down the barrier, and even with language, like such as clients and workers, and we're just people. These are my people. I still see myself there more so than I do in this office space, and that's okay because that's who I am. And I think just, you know, one of the best things is that, you know, my teammates have taken time to get to know me, and I can see the genuineness in when they're listening and they give me space to be able to talk like I am today. You know, if Lucy and Nat hadn't, you know, them involving me in this actually really helped me feel like a part of the team and that I'm valuable. Also, if you're going to employ peer support workers, do so at a level that they feel comfortable with working, but don't limit those hours too much, because limiting that time that I'm in the office or that other peer support workers are in the office gives us a more sense of a divide still. You know, we are valuable, and show that by letting us show up to work more often, because I know in a lot of programs that have peer support workers, we generally are only part-time.
Yeah. I have to say, all throughout this presentation and through conversations that I've had with various people, what's really stood out for me is the concept of removing that us and them scenario and power imbalance. And I do think a really good way of doing that is to stop using the term client and challenge ourselves. And I've certainly adopted that and noticed myself that there's unconscious bias that you don't actually realize you even have when you're using those terms. It's just a little thing that I think is really useful. So it's really cool that you've also mentioned that. Thank you. And I guess just to round off, are there any like key takeaways, and this is to all of you, Lucy and Nat included, that you really want people to get from the session today?
I think the number one thing is asking people. I think Liz said this as well, asking people what they like to do. And before you go in with well, there's this activity group and there's this and this, just really getting a sense of what people have done in the past, because so many of the people we work with have had really interesting careers and jobs and have studied and have loads of interests and things that excite them. So I think finding out a bit about the person and what excites them, and then slowly building on that. That's probably what I would say. Listening and asking questions.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just add to that as well that really being prepared to notice resistance. So if you're getting resistance in a suggestion that you've put forward, really respect that and really try and sort of think about alternative ways of approaching that. Or just go back to simply listening and trying to maybe question whether or not you've actually heard that person correctly about what it is that they're wanting to work towards.
Fantastic.
And I would just say, letting the person know that it's okay to be them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Much.
Oh, it's been fantastic having you. I feel very honoured to have had the three of you sort of support us through delivering this webinar. Hearing your insights is very inspiring. So, and I can tell that the audience were really getting into it. So thank you so much. We are recording this session. I don't know if I said that at the beginning, but this session has been recorded. So we will be making it available through our networks. And so if I can see that some people had to head off to lunch. So if they were keen to get the last bit of it, they will see it. But with that, we will we'll head off. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Bye.